Hey guys, welcome back to Movie Hunters. Today, I am going to recap a 1986 thriller film named Blue Velvet. Before we start, please subscribe Movie Hunters channel. Spoilers ahead, watch out. This film begins with a college student Jeffrey visiting his father who suffers a near-fatal stroke. His father can't even talk. Jeffrey is walking down a dirt road. On his way home he takes a few rocks to throw to blow away his feeling. While looking through some tall grass and weeds he sees something strange. He discovers a severed ear buried under grass and puts it in a paper bag. He takes the ear to the police station. He speaks to Detective John Williams, whom also he knows as his neighbor. Jeffrey opens the paper bag and lets Detective Williams look inside. Then Detective asks to show him exactly where he found it. That ear is checked by the forensic expert and he tells them if the ear was cut off with scissors. Crew of police officers have roped off the area. And they are doing a grid search. Later that evening Jeffrey goes to Williams's house. He is welcomed by Detective's wife. As they begin to talk about the case, he says he's going to tell him when it's all sewed up, then let him know all the details. Outside the house Jeffrey meets the detective's daughter Sandy. She tells him a name she overheard from her father, that the ear somehow relates to a woman being investigated. She is a singer who also lives in the apartment that very close to Jeffrey's house. And she shows him the apartment where the singer lives. Then they continue their way, return to home as the conversation turned into laugh. The next day Jeffrey picks up Sandy from her high school. He wants to discuss something with her. Jeffrey and Sandy are sitting in a restaurant. He asks her for help so he can sneak in and hide and observe singer's apartment, and she thinks it's such a worst idea. He explains his plan. That he will go to her apartment and be the pest control man while he is spraying her apartment. Then he needs Sandy to distract her attention so he can unlock the window and will be back at night. Later, Sandy forcibly agrees. They begin to do it. He walks toward to her apartment and knocks the door, and a woman named Dorothy Valance opens the door. She believes Jeffrey's ruse and lets him into her apartment to spray for bugs. He starts to spray around the kitchen. Suddenly a man comes and they both go out, and he takes advantage of the distraction to steal Dorothy's spare keys. Then gets out. He shows Dorothy's key he stole to Sandy in the evening. Jeffrey and Sandy are going to the slow club and Dorothy Valance comes out on stage. The lights go down and a blue spotlight comes up on her as she sings Blue Velvet with her beautiful voice. For the moment Jeffrey is amazed by her. While Dorothy sings on stage, Jeffrey decides to sneak into Dorothy's apartment to snoop. When they arrive, Sandy begs him to don't do that because it's dangerous, so he offers her to go home by his car, and she finally decides to stay, and she will honk the car 4 times to let him know if Dorothy is on her way up. He takes out the key and it fits. Then the door opens. He looks around the apartment as Dorothy returns when Sandy honks the car horn to warn Jeffrey. He doesn't hear it. Later, Dorothy comes and he decides on the closet to hide in. As she starts to take off her dress and he can see Dorothy come toward him, she walks right up, almost to his face. Fortunately the phone rings. She turns immediately and goes to answer it. She looks desperate when she answers the phone, and she looks at the picture for a moment and hides the picture under a pillow on the couch. She takes her blue velvet robe and wears it. All of a sudden she hears a voice from the closet and slowly gets up. Just as suddenly she opens the closet and there she is with a knife pointed right at something. When she realizes there's someone, Dorothy forces him to get down to his knees and takes off his clothes. Jeffrey's eyes close with nervous ecstasy. There's a knock on the door. She asks him to get back into the closet and keep quiet or he will get killed, and it's Frank. He starts to play his bizarre engagement with Dorothy in her living room. He opens a valve on the canister and places the mask over his nose and mouth, then pretends to be her kid. He also hurts her. Frank is a foul-mouthed, violent sociopath. When he finished he goes off. Jeffrey is stunned. He emerges from the closet and goes to her. He tries to comfort her as she mentions a Dawn name and hugs him. She is still frightened and suddenly screams, hit me, and Jeffrey puts his clothes on and gets out of her apartment. Suddenly he remembers the picture that Dorothy hides. He picks up the pillow and sees a picture of a smiling man and a small boy standing next to him in the photo of marriage license. The next day Jeffrey tells Sandy a censored version of what he saw and concludes that Frank might have kidnapped Dorothy's husband and her son. Jeffrey thinks Frank is holding them to make Dorothy do things for him. It's a strange world. Why are there people like Frank? Jeffrey goes to Dorothy's apartment. She is happy to see him again, and they both kiss later in the car park. Jeffrey watches Frank and his 3 cohorts drive away and follows them to Frank's apartment building in a desolate industrial area. The following day, Jeffrey and Sandy meet. He tells her if he spent all night and day staking out the building and secretly photographing Frank, which includes the man in the yellow jacket that he saw when he was the pest control man. He also saw a well-dressed man with a briefcase, and another thing is from the distance they saw a murderer, a coke dealer shot to death, and a woman with her legs broken. Sandy can't believe Jeffrey went too far to know all about these things. They stare at each other for a moment and tell if he likes her. She smiles to know that he leans over and kisses her gently, but she pulls away because she's already taken. Jeffrey heads his way up to Dorothy's apartment again and they begin to make love, and they stop for a moment. He tells her the truth by saying that he knows everything about her husband and son. He tries to help her, so it's better if she tells everything to the police. Suddenly she gets panic and screams, "No! Police!" Just as he is leaving, Dorothy says Jeffrey is her special friend and she needs him. He starts walking toward the door with Dorothy beside him until Frank and his gang show up. You can see the Dorothy's frightened face and she tells him a lie if Jeffrey is her neighbor. Frank is upset and forces them both to the car. They end up at the house. It's Ben's house. He is a suave, effeminate partner in crime. He offers them a beer. As they start to drink together, Frank allows Dorothy to see her son. Because of Frank's request, Ben lip syncs Roy Orbison's song in dreams. He and his gang enjoy his show. He shouts to his gang that they're going for another high-speed joyride, including Jeffrey on the road. Frank becomes more brutish and confrontational, taunting Dorothy as rough as Jeffrey. He uses Frank as doing something to Dorothy's chest and she is frightened and in pain. Jeffrey gets mad, then he hits him hard in the face. Frank and his gang grab Jeffrey and pull him out of the car. He puts lipstick heavy onto his lips. He threatens to don't see her anymore. He will send him straight to hell. Then Frank and his gang yank Jeffrey from the car and savagely beat him. Jeffrey wakes up on the ground the next morning and goes home covered with swollen and bloody on his face. He is overcome with guilt and despair. As he begins to cry, he finally realizes that things have gone too far and decides to go to the police. At the police station he sees that Detective Williams's partner is the yellow man and his name is Detective Gordon. He straightly leaves the place. It proves that Gordon has worked for Frank. He has been murdering Frank's rival coke dealers and stealing confiscated substances from the evidence room for Frank to sell later at Sandy's home. Jeffrey briefs Detective Williams about his findings and tells him Dorothy's condition. Williams reminds Jeffrey of the need to keep quiet and to don't reveal Sandy's involvement about this. The night later, as Jeffrey comes back to Sandy's house for dating, just then a man comes up to the door. Jeffrey turns to see, and it's Detective Gordon, the yellow man. Suddenly he calls him as he is surprised. Detective Williams tells him to take it easy after the party as he drives Sandy home. They're followed by car. He is relieved to discover that it's only Sandy's jealous ex-boyfriend Mike. He threatens to beat Jeffrey for stealing his girlfriend Dorothy, but suddenly Dorothy appears. She is naked, beaten and confused, and it makes Mike backs down while Jeffrey straightly hugs her and gets her into the car. Sandy brings Dorothy to her house where Dorothy reveals her clandestine relationship with Jeffrey in front of Sandy and her mother. Sandy begins to cry while she moves back and watches them. She is confused about what happened between them. The paramedics are loading Dorothy into the ambulance on a stretcher. Dorothy is moaning and Jeffrey tells Sandy he has to take care of Dorothy and she slaps him on the phone. Sandy tells Jeffrey she loves him and he asks Sandy to send her father to Dorothy's apartment immediately. She calls the police station and they also don't know where his father is. When he arrives at Dorothy's apartment, he finds the dead body of Dorothy's husband who is missing an ear. Detective Gordon is also there standing in the daze with a severe head injury. Jeffrey tries to talk with Detective Williams over Gordon's police radio but then remembers Frank has a police radio. So he lies about his location inside the apartment hoping Frank will assume he doesn't know about Frank's radio. He notices a man get out of the car. He recognizes the man and it's Frank who disguised himself with suitcase on his hand. He heads up to Dorothy's apartment. He looks back once and Frank sees him. He rushes to Gordon and takes the police radio out of his pocket and tries to tell Detective William if Frank is in Dorothy's apartment. He leaps into the closet just as Frank opens the apartment door and enters. Frank looks around to kill Jeffrey and Jeffrey quickly rushes out of the closet to take Gordon's gun and back to as Frank comes directly toward him. They stare for the moment as Jeffrey pulls the trigger until Frank's head is blown off. In the end, bad people will destroy themselves. One day and another afternoon, Dorothy and her son play happily in the park together. That's all for today, my family. Help Movie Hunters by like and subscribe. See you on the next videos.